What's up, everybody? I'm Blessed and Free. Welcome back to another episode of DOC TV. So if you guys are tuning in for the first time on this channel, I talk about jail, prison, crime, corruption, and all the above. And, I'm in a couple groups on Facebook, and a lot of people that have loved ones in prison have asked me to do an episode on, what goes on when their loved one's in prison and how they go about their life with that going on. So I don't have a lot of experience with that because I'm always the one in prison. So I brought somebody on that has a lot of experience with that. And I'm going to let her share her story. For everybody watching at home, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? What's your name and kind of where you're from and where it all started for you?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for having me on the channel. Absolutely. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to kind of be a voice for the family members who do time on the outside. I heard somebody who did a whole bunch of time. One of the first people acknowledged that family members were in prison too, just on the outside. And it was the validation that I needed. My name is Ro Clausen. My husband was serving a 213-year sentence because of mandatory minimum sentencing laws, where nobody was physically hurt during his crime. And to be completely honest, he was guilty. He deserved to do time. Nobody ever said he was innocent. But the fact that he's being tried like somebody who has done multiple homicides or horrible things to children or women, it was so unfair. So I fought for years. He served 20 years. And in August of 2020, because of compassionate release and because of the extraordinary and compelling circumstances, not only surrounding his case and his sentence, but also his accomplishments on the inside and everything that he was able to do. And he didn't get a shot or a charge for over a decade. By the time he was being released, he was finally awarded his chance to come home and our chance to be together.
Wow, that's a long time. Were you with him before he went to prison?
So we were really good friends before, high school age. And then he went to prison one time before this. He served 3 years in New Jersey State. I went away to college. And so we completely lost touch. I came home and I had relationships, he had relationships. We got back together about 9 years into this federal sentence.
And I'm sure everybody wants to know this question. So what made you want to be with somebody that was in prison?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I get it all the time.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah. And, it's crazy because up until 6 months ago, I was the insane girl who had just these pipe dreams that he was going to get out. And I was following along with this prisoner and all of this stuff. But thankfully, I was awarded my happily ever after. But I don't think at 8 years old, anybody is like, my dream in life is to be with a guy in prison. And you know what? I want a lifer. I didn't want to be with him. But when we got back in touch, we started communicating over the email system that the federal prison system has. It's called CorrLinks. We just exchanged these messages. And I'm sure anybody that has a relationship that starts out, it's not that we were pen pals, but kind of in the beginning, you communicate on this deep level. So when you're in a relationship on the outside, or you start dating somebody, you go on a couple dates, you probably wind up getting physical real quickly, and there's not too much substance to the relationship. And even after you're dating for a really long time, even eventually married, your relationship revolves around getting up, going to work, coming home. I'll cook dinner, you take out the trash, we're going to go to bed, we'll rinse, repeat. And there really isn't too much time to get that deep. But when you have all of that physical stripped away from you in a relationship, you're forced to be able to talk about what really makes you tick on the inside. So that's what we did for a few months. And I started to realize, I don't want to date other guys. He is so perfect for me, minus this life sentence. And so he always told me, he's like, no expectations. I don't want to hold you back. I'm not going to do that to you. That's so wrong. I don't have an out date. And I was talking to one of my girlfriends one time, and I'm like, it's just so unfair. It's a huge joke because he's so perfect for me, and I can never have him. And she's like, sweetheart, you are always so concerned about what everybody else thinks or what everybody else says, and you're always trying to appease other people. Why don't you just forget that for now? Why don't you just take it one day at a time and follow your heart for once? And that's what I did. So I don't think I ever decided, I want to be with this man in prison. It just kind of evolved into that. And then once you're kind of deep into it, I just was ready to fight tooth and nail till the day I died to get him home because it was so unjust and he didn't deserve it.
Props to you for doing that, because a lot of people are married for, 8 years and then their man goes to prison and they're gone within the first year. So it really says a lot about your character. And, it sounds like you guys legitimately, genuinely fell in love through communicating. You know what I mean?
So I always say, I developed a support group called Strong Prison Wives and Families, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. But I always tell the people, it's majority women, but the men and women that join my group, there's no right or wrong way to do this. And just because I was dedicated to a lifer doesn't mean that if you get 8 days in, 8 years in, 8 months in, whatever it is, and you need to go because this is no longer serving you and you feel like your life's on hold and you can't live anymore, you have to walk away. And that's totally fine. Nobody's holding a gun to your head and saying you have to stay in this relationship. And if your loved one on the inside if they're trying to control you from behind the wall, that's an enormous red flag. So absolutely, I'm dedicated and I'm loyal, and you probably will not find a more loyal person than the loved one of somebody who's incarcerated. But that doesn't mean that you're wrong for having to move on with your life if that's what you feel called to do.
What was your family thinking when all this was going on?
They thought I was crazy. I remember when we first got back in touch and I first decided, okay, this is it. I'm in for the long haul. I have a whole bunch of sisters. There are 6 children in my family, 5 girls and a brother. And all of my sisters and my best friend, who's like a sister to me because we knew each other since we were 7 years old, we were all in this text thread. And I remember just being like angry and like, it's my decision and I'm going to do what I want to do. And if you don't support me, then I don't need to speak to you anymore. And now looking back in hindsight, I regret it. I mean, everybody eventually within days, because it's your family, got over it. And we just kind of talked through it. But I remember, or I guess the lesson here for people who do have a loved one on the inside and are going through it, because it's normal. We all go through that at some point. Remember that they're doing it out of love. This is so foreign. It's so unconventional. And they're scared for you. And not everybody in prison is there for being a Boy Scout. Let's be real. They're not there for helping old ladies cross the street. There are some really bad people in prison. And then there are some people who had bad circumstances and they've changed their lives. But what we see on TV, what media puts out there, they like to glamorize criminal life, and they have to have a villain and they have to have a victim. So these people inside of prison are villainized. Your family is worried for you. They're worried for him coming out and breaking your heart, or worst case scenario, I've heard we had about 5 women throughout all of the years that he got out and he did something really harmful to her. And the worst one was he killed her. So there is reason for people to be concerned. Now, my advice is always have a conversation with them, be honest, tell them, let's agree, disagree, and then set boundaries. Listen, I'm not going to come to your house and be subjected to you patronizing me or you lecturing me every single time I come here. So let's not talk about it. I'm a big girl. I've thought of everything that you could potentially tell me 1,000 times over because it's my life. But if you're going to bring it up, then I'm going to leave. And you have to live within those boundaries, and that's it. You have to weigh all of your options. You have to listen and hear what they're saying. If they're saying things because, hey, maybe he's in prison because he hurt you and you shouldn't be with him, and you're making excuses, you know deep down on the inside that those are excuses.
What would you say would be because I see a lot of people in these Facebook groups post and they're like, hey, I talked to my man this weekend and he's saying this, this, and this, and what does this mean? And it's usually like what you said about the controllingness that they do. Would you say that's the number one sign or the number one red flag that a female should look for when she's, dealing with somebody in prison?
I think it's a few things. So I created a video on my YouTube channel called Red Flags in a Prison Relationship, where I really break that down. But I think first and foremost is going to be somebody who's asking you to spend a significant amount of money. They always need more. Something happens. The guy next door needed it. This guy needs shoes. This guy stole my shoes. It's always a catastrophe in his life. And it's never enough money. And then you don't give it to him and he flips out on you or he disappears. That would be a sign to me that potentially he's not in it for the right reason. He's using you for money. Now, caveat, inmates need money, right? So if your loved one is like, listen, I need you to put money on the books so I can call you, that's completely different than every day he needs more and more and more and more. And I trust that you're smart enough to know the difference. Now, aside from the money thing, he might start asking, or she might start asking you to do illegal things. Hey, can you just bring this into the visit room? I just need you to do this. I just need you to transfer all this money from this person's books to that person's books. And again, caveat, sometimes they might need you to put money on somebody's books because they need a pair of shoes legitimately. Just know the difference. And a lot of times I just tell people, test him. You don't know him before prison, test him. Tell him, you know what, I just can't make rent this month, so I'm so sorry. I'm not going to be able to put that money on your books. If he freaks out, there's the red flag. If he's pissed off at you and says that you don't love him because you're not going to put drugs down your pants and bring them into the visit room,
ding, ding, ding.
There's your red flag. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're pretty smart. So you didn't, I mean, it doesn't seem like, you know, from what I've watched and you've told me that any of that went on in your relationship, but I'm sure, you know, that you saw a lot of that in other people's relationships, which helped you learn and then guide other people. So I think that's a good thing because I'm a man and I've been in prison and I know what some of them do to women on the outside. So you're absolutely right when you're thinking that way and those signs are, you know, sticking out to you. So that's a good thing that you saw those. When he was in there, how did you cope with like the loneliness and just like the physical touch, you know? I mean, that's a big thing in a relationship. How did you cope with that? How did you get through that?
People ask me that all the time, and they never believed me when I said, like, I didn't have an open relationship. I didn't date other men. I didn't have sex with other men, nothing like that. Although people do, and that's totally fine. Like I said earlier, there's no right or wrong way to do this. So some people, they open their relationship up and she's allowed to have a boyfriend or sleep with other people, or sometimes they only want her to have a girlfriend, and that's cool. And it's what works for them. And my advice is always, as long as you're honest in the relationship. And sometimes the person on the inside might say, you could do whatever you want, but I don't want to hear about it. And then I had one girl say to me, well, he said that, and like years later, I'm hanging out with this other guy on the outside. I mean, I'm still visiting him. I'm still putting money on his books, but I'm going by our whatever we discussed. And he asked me, even though he said he never wanted to know, and I told him, and he got pissed off at me and he didn't want to speak to me. So again, that's kind of like those boundaries that you have to live within. If he says he doesn't want to know and he asks you, remind him.
You don't want to know.
Right. For me personally, I never did. I never could. I couldn't stand the thought of having another man touch me. I'm not attracted to women. That wasn't a road that I wanted to go down. So I always joke with everyone, like, I worked out, and I worked out a lot. Before Adam and I were back together, I was competing in fitness competitions. So I've always been an athlete. I've always worked out. And I just kind of channeled it into that. And also, I have nieces and nephews. I would always cuddle with them. I would have them for sleepovers, stuff like that. So I would get hugs and stuff like that here and there. And I think people don't realize, like, I had somebody who was so funny every single time I spoke to him, or Adam spoke to him, which was at least once a month for years. He'd be like, so how about those conjugal visits? And we're like, well, no, he's in the federal system. There's no such thing. They don't have them. And he couldn't wrap his mind around it. And literally every time he'd be like, so you're going on a conjugal visit? And we're like, I just told you last month, no, we don't have those. But the longer you go without sex, it's kind of like when you go on a diet. The longer you go without sugar, the more you don't miss it. You don't want it anymore. Right, it's almost like you miss the craving. It's the same thing. And it's so hard to put to words if you've never been there. But people who are in my shoes, they'll totally understand that it's just not part of my relationship. It's not part of my life at that point. So it's just, that's how it was.
Yeah, that was a good analogy with the sugar and the cravings and all that kind of stuff. What was your biggest fear through this whole journey of you know, being with Adam when he was locked up?
My biggest fear, so it's kind of twofold. My biggest fear, number one, was him never coming home, because Adam didn't have life on the books. Adam had a number on the books, and it was this crazy unfair sentence. So I always knew in the back of my mind, or I always believed in the back of my mind, that he'd be awarded his release. But throughout the years, there were so many times we'd get close, and then they'd pull it away from us, and we'd get closer, and then they'd pull it away from us. And it was just year after year, time after time, high after high, low after low, that I started to almost get numb. But especially the last year before he got out was probably the hardest year of my life, because I was just at the point where I was like, this is never going to happen. But I was so far in that I could never give up on it. But there were so many times that I asked myself, like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And that's what I always tell people. If you're going to get in a relationship, especially with somebody who's a lifer, especially somebody you didn't know before, you have to really weigh your options, because today you're like, yeah, I could do it forever. I'm his biggest fan. I'm his biggest soldier. But in 5 years or 10 years, are you still going to be saying that when you're lonely? You go to bed by yourself every single night. All of your money is going to visit and phone calls and whatever else he needs in there. It gets really hard. I have a whole video on my YouTube channel about what it's really like being with a lifer, and I go into that further. But the second part of that is, we said earlier, we have a mutual friend named Chad Mark. Chad and Adam were sentenced under the same law, 924C, which all of us who have gotten relief on that are fighting really hard to get it changed, because it's just so unfair. And within this law, they say you have to, for, I think it's like the first 924C charge after your underlying crime. So Adam got 8 years for his underlying, has to run after that. It can't run concurrently at the same time. 5 years. And then for everyone thereafter, it's 25 plus 25 plus 25. So the longest 924C sentence that I've heard of, there might be more, was like 750 years, and the guy didn't even use his gun. What? Like, what? Crazy. It makes no sense. Anyway, I heard this story about 2 weeks before Adam got his compassionate release. Chad was awarded his. And the way that I heard the story was, his family was there to pick him up. They're in the parking lot. They could literally see each other. He's walking out. And as he's walking out and his family's walking up, they're like, oh, Chad, no. The prosecutor said you can't go home today. They're appealing it, or they issued a stay or something like that, right? So I remember telling Adam, I was like, I don't think I would ever bounce back from that. Like, I think that would be my cutoff point. How do you recover from that? Props to Chad's family and Chad for getting through that. So now fast forward a week later, I'm going through the exact same thing. And I'm there at the facility after a grueling 48 hours, because they don't want to let these people go home. They gave us the runaround, dragging their feet. I really didn't know if they were going to let it happen. So I'm finally there. And as he's walking out, he comes up and he gives me the hugest hug. I still have Chad in the back of my mind. And this cop walks out. And he goes, hey, Clausen, they need you back inside. I swear to you, it was like a panic attack. And I turned to him and I was like, get in the car, we're leaving. Wind up the cops joking. He thought it was funny. It was just really bad timing. He didn't know about Chad. Obviously, he didn't know about my anxiety around it. But I think that was my second biggest fear in all of those years, that I didn't even realize was a fear until I was living it in the moment. Thank God Chad and Adam are both home. And I think the government dropped appeals on both of them. So I think they're both fine now. But it was a rough thing to live through.
Yeah, it sounds like a rough day to live through. Both days, really, for everybody.
Yeah.
But did you go visit him on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when you went to visit him in federal prison, what did you see with your own eyes through the visitation process that happened with guards when you were in there that just literally blew your mind?
Oh, so many things. So when I first started to go see Adam, I would go every week because he was 2 hours away from me. And there was a cop that worked visit that didn't like me at all for no reason. I think he just didn't like Adam. So by default, he didn't like me. And every single week that I went, there was something wrong with what I was wearing, with how I looked. One time he's like, you have to move your car. And I said, I can move my car. He's like, yeah, you can't park in the spot you're parked in. Because it was snowing and it was icy and he was just giving me a hard time. I parked in the same spot or the same area of the parking lot every single week. So I said, fine, I wasn't going to give him a hard time. I moved my car. The following week, he didn't like what I was wearing. The following week, he didn't like a headband that I was wearing. Now it was just cloth, like what my shirt's made out of. There was nothing metal in there, nothing like that. He makes me take out my hair and it's all like slicked back. I looked crazy. You know how girls are. I was so self-conscious. And then halfway through visit, he comes over with this like vindictive look on his face and he's like, I checked, that headband would have been fine. Like, yeah, now that I can't leave, that's fine. I mean, that's not even the biggest of deals. The next week, I think I come in and I was wearing, that's way back when like tight leggings and Ugg boots were really popular to wear. And he's like, you can't wear those pants because they're too tight. I said, okay. I always wound up at this point having backup clothing in my car.
Yeah.
So many backup things. Like you look like a nun at one point and you don't even care because you just need to get in. So I walk back in with my backup outfit on and he lets me in and he lets the girl in behind me wearing the exact same thing I was wearing that he made me change. And just, again, with that face. So I went through that kind of stuff. I mean, I've seen cops just be nasty to people, jump on guys when they think that there's a handoff. Thank God I never experienced any of that personally. I always just tried to be really respectful and make sure that at the end of the day, even when they're doing the things that they're doing, like what I was saying before to me every week, they have the power. So I think that the message to people who are in my shoes going in to visit prison is to choose your battles and to choose them wisely. And it freaking sucks because you have to bite your tongue a lot of the time, but they're purposely a lot of times pushing your buttons. So you go back and you tell your loved one what happened, so then there can be beef there. At the end of the day, they have the power and they can throw your loved one in the hole. They can remove your visits, and it could just be because they don't like you. Oh, here's another one. This didn't happen to me, but this happened to one of my really good girlfriends. It was July. There was no AC. It was hot. Her husband was a stocky guy, and he's sitting in a chair. And at this place, you could sit facing one another, and there was a table between you. So they're facing each other, and she uncrossed and recrossed her legs because one of her legs was falling asleep. Well, the cops come and they jump on him, and she was like, and they pull him away and they pull him into the back, and they're taking him to the hole, and they pull her to the front. She's like, what happened? And I'm in visit that day. So I look over and you see the cop grabbing the chair he was sitting in and sliding it across and going, see? Well, they said that she was fondling him with her foot. And look at the chair. There's condensation on the chair. There's a wet mark on the chair. So obviously you were doing what we think. It's 110 degrees in the visit room and he sweats. What are you talking about? So she goes back, she leaves, she gets kicked out of visits. They lose their visits for like a year. He goes to the hole for a couple months and she writes the warden and she was like, this never happened. Watch the video. Well, they come back and they watch the video and it was inconclusive. Just like anything that works in their favor, the video in the visit room will always be inconclusive. They're always going to see what sides with their cops. So the point in saying all of this is that they have the power, and just be careful and choose your battle. Stand up for yourself. Don't let them walk all over you. But if it's something stupid like taking the headband off of your head and you feel like you look awful, who cares? Just shut up, take off your headband, and go in the back.
Yeah, I talk about that on my channel with, the number one thing that goes on in prison is the mind games that the guards play with the inmates. And honestly, it's sad and it needs to stop. You're already punished, and then you have another person on a daily basis trying to make your life a living hell when it's already a living hell. You know what I mean? So I talk about that a lot because I've went through situations like that. Well, I mean, you said you had a YouTube channel. So I'd like to have you back on for maybe another episode. But I want you to be able to share your YouTube and talk about, what's on your channel and, just let everybody watching know where to find you.
Yeah, so it's Ro and Adam Clausen, R-O and A-D-A-M, Clausen, C-L-A-U-S-E-N. There was a ton of stuff to help prison wives and family members up until Adam got out. And now it's basically our life after prison. So about 6 weeks after he got home, I wound up getting pregnant. So we're having our first child. So a lot of stuff about that. I just like to give hope to people who don't think that there is another side to this, that are stuck in that spot where it's just such a dreadful, sad situation. There is another side, and you just have to push and you just have to fight for the one that you love, and you will get your happily ever after. I have this thing that I say, I'll tell this story really, really quick. I promise I'm so long-winded. But when I was going through this and it was probably about a year and a half, and I just felt so alone, and I felt like nobody understood me, and I felt like at best people to my face would be like, oh yeah, okay, that's nice, and then they would turn around and be like, she's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, like what's wrong with her? So I decided, this is back in like 2009, to go online and see if there was anybody out there who could understand me. And what I found was there were very few support groups, if you want to call them that, but basically it was like glorifying the street life, and it was just living to this stigma that people think prison wives are. And I was like, we could do better than this. And if it's not out there, I'm going to make it. So I started a support group called Strong Prison Wives and Families. And at that time, it just started growing and growing and growing. And it's not like social media today, where on TikTok, you can have like 500,000 subscribers in 5 minutes because things go viral really quick. But we were growing 500 members a day back then, which was huge. And that just showed how much that support was needed. So in addition to my YouTube channel, I also have Strong Prison Wives and Families that I still have volunteers that help run. It's a nonprofit, and you can find us there anywhere on social media at Strong Prison Wives for people who are going through it and who do need that support. We have 100,000 members, a whole sisterhood, and we do have some brothers, of people who understand what you're going through, who can relate, who can offer a shoulder to cry on. Like, I've met some of my best friends in the whole entire world through that, because they get me. And we could get, like, you could say she's in the hole, and people will understand what that means, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And congratulations on the baby.
Thank you.
That's a big thing. So I know you guys are excited. Well, I just want to thank you for coming on the channel and, sharing your story, and we'll have you back on again. For anybody watching right now that hasn't, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, and go subscribe to her YouTube channel and check out her Prison Wives group. So with that, it's DOC TV, and we're out.